Welcome to the Hard Corner podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Grendel. Today's exciting and revealing podcast is brought to you by Astro Sound Labs in Reno, Nevada, Bayrock Multifamily, and our music by him, my mom, and the internet. The office market in the U.S., in particular California, has experienced one of the largest erosions in value amongst all property types in the past 3 years. Central business districts in the urban core have experienced a huge downturn since COVID, of course, and workers occupying offices. And we talked about that in the last podcast. In fact, this trend started in the early 2000s, even before the pandemic. Where did these workers go besides work from home? The answer is the suburbs. Suburban employment growth in the 50 highest growth counties in the U.S. had an employment increase of more than 2.5 times over urban areas in 2019, and that trend continues today. According to a recent study published by Brown University, almost all the leading tech centers in the country are primarily suburban in nature. This trend mirrors recent political trends, wherein over even 2/3 of millennials prefer suburban living. Why? Too much crime and homelessness remain in the urban core and central business districts throughout the country. And now, as CNBC just reported yesterday, office conversions and demolitions in 2025 are projected to exceed the level of new construction for the first time in 25 years. And that amount is over 23 million square feet. That's a staggering number. And I suspect most of that will be demolition as opposed to office conversions to residential. Today's podcast features an active investor who maintains their longtime headquarters in the urban core in downtown LA. How ironic. One of their principal assets is a Class A high-rise office building in the heart of San Francisco's financial district. This looks like it's podcast 1102 at the Hard Corner podcast. Today's guest is Mark Handin. He's managing principal with Barker Pacific Group based in Los Angeles. Mark and I go back a long way. Mark was one of my original proteges when I founded my own company, and then he spread his wings and went on to greener pastures, doing lots of activity, went off to graduate school at my alma mater, now his as well, the University of Southern California, and relocated from Northern California at the inception of his real estate career to Los Angeles. Michael Barker and I, former CEO and founder of Barker, and the founder of Barker Pacific Group, met in the early 2000s. We sat on a board in San Francisco for one of USC's real estate programs, outreach into the community for young developers and aspiring real estate professionals. Mark, welcome.
Pleasure to be here, Stuart. Great to see your face.
Great to see you again as well. And Mark started with Barker Pacific Group, $3 billion track record of real estate investment and redevelopment. And Mark, when did you start with Barker Pacific?
September 11th of 2008. Date to
wow.
remember.
So you remember those days?
I do.
Yeah. And if I remember that time, you had multiple hats on when you first went to work for Michael. And you rolled out everything from office, multifamily.
And that's been part of the beauty of being at Barker Pacific Group. You know, and one day I'm overseeing redevelopment of a project on the construction side of things. Another day I'm negotiating a lease with a respective tenant. Another day we're working on a model and a business plan for potential acquisition and talking to investors about the capital stack. So I got a broad spectrum of experience early on at Barker Pacific Group, which I'm super grateful for. And now it's seemed to have narrowed a little bit as my time has gone by at Barker Pacific.
So when you started, what were you? Were you a development investment manager, project manager?
Honestly, I was a project manager for a 330,000 square foot office redevelopment in El Segundo. A lease had been signed. It was the biggest lease in Los Angeles that year, in 2008 of all years, Stuart, with Northrop Grumman for the entire 330,000 square feet. And so there was a major redevelopment involved in getting the base building systems up to snuff. And I'll never forget, I would go into these project meetings with the Northrop Grumman folks, and I'd request plans for what they're doing in the space. And they would always push back because it was top secret. And I kept pushing, hey, we're the landlords. We want to know what's going on in our building. And I'll never forget, they gave me a set of plans with blackout floor plates. The whole thing was just blacked out floor plates. That's
Wow.
what I got. And it was there was my entrance into the office world and dealing with large corporate users.
And I'm sure Michael and your team directed you to go review the lease.
Oh, yeah.
The tenant had to cooperate on deliverables to the landlord, like your plan or your intended plan for occupancy. But I'm sure Grumman was shielding it from and using the national secrets excuse, I guess, to avoid that obligation.
Yep.
Well, that's really a way to get your feet wet in the business. And when you did all this, did you have an inkling that you were going to fall in love with office, commercial, any one product? Because when I first met you, we were all multifamily.
Honestly, I didn't. I was going to grad school at USC, which carried a heavy tuition, and I needed to find a way to pay for it. And my background was in real estate development, and thanks to you, Stuart. And so but this was also 2008. And if you recall, that wasn't the rosiest of times for what we do. And I remember pounding the phones, hitting the network, nobody was hiring. And here I was with this bullet of tuition coming at me, and I needed to figure it out. And by chance, I found a listing on, get this, Craigslist, that Michael was looking for someone to project manage this asset. And so that's how I got in the door at Barker Pacific Group. And in my interview with Michael, I had done research on him prior to sitting down with him. I was pretty candid, and he kind of chuckled when I gave this answer, but he said, what are your ambitions? I said, I one day I want to be sitting where you're sitting, Michael. And, I was 26 years old, and I think he appreciated it. I think clearly there was a long journey from there to here, but he liked that attitude and gave me a shot. And
that's great. That's a good segue into Michael Barker, discussion about Michael, your mentor, again, founder of Barker Pacific. Again, I met Michael in the early 2000s in San Francisco. He had just closed his one large asset up there at 1 Sansom Street. That was a JV with a major institutional investor. Michael Barker unfortunately passed away recently. So just touching on that, you're the managing principal of the firm. You're continuing the firm's legacy with a team in place. Can you describe just briefly how that's going and what you see for the near term?
Yeah, sure. I'll start by saying it was devastating. Michael is, he was my mentor from day one. When I started at Barker Pacific, you were also a mentor. There's Stuart. But he was a mentor from day one, but then our friendship grew and he became a dear friend. And I so miss the conversations we'd have every morning. We really gelled on chasing deals together and had an excitement for this business together. And that's what I miss most, and just his, tutelage and all that. But, Michael had this foresight in 2020 to start succession planning, which was good news, right? So we had already started a transition prior to this very untimely event. So we weren't entirely caught flat-footed. Michael had already announced me as the managing principal of the firm in November of last year. Again, we weren't caught entirely flat-footed here from an operation perspective, but I just really miss my dear friend and mentor. Moving forward, we just closed our first deal post-Michael, which was a pretty big milestone for us. We acquired Mission Ridge, which is a Class A suburban office deal in Orange County, Mission Viejo. I think that gave us the confidence to know that we can continue this moving forward. And candidly, this is what Michael wanted us to do. We'd had a ton of conversations about it. He knew there was going to be a day when he was no longer with us or at the helm, and wanted to make sure that we continued. So, the strategy moving forward here is to continue doing what Michael taught us to do and what we know how to do and what we specialize in.
So let's talk about that. So leading up, obviously Mission Ridge is a real watershed event for the firm post Michael, but preceding all that, going back to 2008, what has been your typical Barker Pacific Group execution strategy? Product type, location. You and I discussed multi-building acquisition and repositioning in Roseville, those kind of things. Can you touch on that execution strategy?
Yeah, sure. We've always been very basis driven. We're always very focused on being able to both buy and sell an asset in our underwriting well below replacement cost. We think that's kind of one of the fundamental milestones of investing, especially for what we do. We focus on buying cash flowing investments that can provide some cash flow, whether it be to distribute or to reinvest into the asset for the tenant improvement or capital costs needed. We also, with cash flowing assets, you have more favorable and more optionality on the debt terms you're able to achieve. It also ensures that you don't have a gun to your head to make a deal with a tenant that isn't right for the building. If you buy a vacant building and you have, debt service coming at you that becomes insurmountable, you might bend to make a deal with a tenant that really isn't right for the project. So we focus on compelling bases, in-place cash flow, and we've typically focused on assets where there's some piece of the equation that is off. For example, the institutional capital partner that's selling it ran out of money. Their fund life is ended and they need to dump the asset for whatever reason. And we can come in and provide that much needed capital and expertise to release the building up. We focus on buying fundamentally sound assets. They have to have good locations. They have to have a reason for existing. We're not trying to go way off the beaten path and buy something that, if you're buying it cheap in a good market, think how much more difficult it would be to sell that same asset in a difficult market. So we're trying to find well-located Class A, primarily office assets, and more recently been focused on Class A suburban office assets.
Okay, so in the past when you started 08 forward, where were those Class A product submarkets that you were searching for new deals?
So San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, other the entire Bay Area. Sacramento. Yep.
Yeah. And you did a little bit of multifamily along the way in those markets, because I remember you Barker Pacific bought the GP of an affordable entity.
AF Evans.
Affordable portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah.
AF Evans went BK. I met Art Evans back in the 80s, and he was for our listeners, he was an extremely prolific affordable housing developer and mixed income, both affordable and market rate, just a quality guy. But when he passed, the portfolio just kind of sat there. And then what caused that acquisition? What happened?
Yeah, there was, as I recall, there was debt at the platform level that had defaulted, and there was an ability to step in and right the ship through BK proceeding, which is what we did. And Michael, full credit to Michael. I mean, we specialize in office assets, but Michael hasn't had such a great nose for deals, and AF Evans was one of those. We had never done affordable housing. I shouldn't say we've never done it. We'd only done one other deal, but this one made all the sense in the world, and it turned out to be an absolute home run.
Right. Well, you guys basically took over the GP and inherited control of, it was a couple thousand units, or at least 1,000.
Yeah, a couple thousand, ranging in different geographies, and it turned out to be a swimmingly good deal.
So that makes Barker Pacific very opportunistic, because Michael's genesis of his career was Texas office, correct?
That's right. Michael actually was one of Gerald Hines' right-hand men. That's how he got into business. He focused on the Houston office market for Gerald Hines. And for those of you that know, that's their flagship market. Yep. And so he learned from the best. He really did. And, at some point he realized that he could do it himself. And there were some folks that wanted to back him. And so was the birth of Barker Pacific Group.
So he comes to California,
yep.
Barker Pacific Group, plants his flag in downtown LA, and you guys are off and running.
He actually planted it in San Francisco first, and then made his way down to Southern California. Yeah, he made a stop there. He made a stop in Phoenix and then San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. He did a deal, the old Delta Dental building, south of Market.
That's right. You got it.
I remember that.
Bingo.
Man, now I'm dating myself.
You never ceases to amaze me, Stuart. The references.
I didn't have that in my notes. I just remember that because that's when Michael stepped into San Francisco.
Yeah, and at the time, you'll remember going into that geography of San Francisco, people were like, "I don't know, man. Are you sure you know what you're doing? This Texan's coming in, parachuting in," and it turned out to be a fabulous deal.
Well, that sounds like just a wonderful story. It was very unfortunate of Michael's passing, but the growth of his business and bringing in folks like yourself to go execute is very impressive, and continuing these excellent portfolio acquisitions and one-off acquisitions. So now it really appears that you guys have turned into an office thoroughbred. Our last podcast, we had a San Francisco expert, so to speak, and you probably remember Trevor Wilson at Ridge Capital Investors. He's one of the more active buyers in downtown San Francisco right now, and I think you guys still have one asset here in One Sansom, right, in San Francisco?
Correct.
So most of your exposure, or going forward, you're in Southern California. You talked about suburban office. So what does that execution strategy look like today? You've done a few deals in Sacramento. You're in SoCal. Your office is in downtown LA, and then you close Mission Ridge in Orange County. I guess we could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So the execution on Mission Ridge, we were able to acquire this asset for $137 a foot. It's the preeminent office project in Mission Viejo. I'll touch on some of the characteristics that we found attractive because I think it resonates to our overall strategy right now. This is an affluent suburban market that has a very defined inventory of product. So it's very easy to get our heads around the marketplace, really aggregate, market data and intel in terms of leasing, and be able to, as opposed to downtown Los Angeles or downtown San Francisco, where you have 70 million square feet, and it's very difficult to identify sometimes who's our competitive set, who's active right now, who's not active right now, who are we directly competing with. Mission Viejo, it's really finite. And so we were able to go in there and buy this asset for $137 a foot. It's 50% leased. It was owned by Barings, very institutional owner that did all the right things. I mean, truly did all the right things. They repositioned the asset, new lobbies, corridors. They put a putting green outside, painted the exterior, put in some of the new back of house HVAC work. They did everything right except buy it at the right time. And they're not unique. We're victim to the same thing on the other side of the table, where we've had to sell assets where we did what we thought was everything right, but in this environment you had to sell. So we acquired this thing for about an 8 cap going in at 51% leased with about a 4-year WALT. You have blue chip tenancy such as B of A Wealth, Wells Fargo, U.S. Investments. It's just a good roster of tenants and the folks that want to be there. It's more granular tenancy as well. It's just, we like the idea of buying these assets with these kind of, profiles where you don't have a major bullet of a tenant, in a Google or an Amazon coming at you in 3 years with an expiration that can totally make or break your business plan execution. It's a smaller credit granular tenancy where we're able to buy and build to, in that case, a 13% return on cost in our model without pushing too much. And we believe that that's going to give us a ton of optionality, whether it be to refinance down the road or sell it and build enough.
So that's an unlevered return, Mark?
That's just a return on cost. That's just a pure return on cost. The levered returns that we're building to are in the mid-20s, mid-upper 20s project level.
Right. But if you took the 13, you're saying that's my acquisition cost. I'm bringing it to stabilization. I'm assuming that's a 90% occupancy rate overall, leases in place, and then a capitalization budget to bring that to the restoration level that you feel you can take at the 90%, whether it's common area improvements, TIs, brokerage commissions, et cetera. So all in cost with NOI over that being the numerator, cost being the denominator, that's 13 unlevered.
You got it. And that's also an important distinction, is that's gross. That's the gross number. So if you look at the net numbers where we're able to actually recycle some of the cash that the property's generating now into it becomes even higher. Now, obviously we need to execute. And I think what's given us some comfort in our ability to execute is we've bought a couple other deals post-COVID world in Orange County, namely Fullerton Towers from UBS and Griffin Towers from Equity Office Blackstone, where we've seen the execution on the leasing side. They're both actually 88% leased right now. Both of them didn't start that way. Both of them, the prior landlords did all the right things, and it was a leasing play for us. And so we have a certain level of pattern recognition in this arena, especially in Orange County, where we believe in ourselves and our ability to go do it again. The biggest question is who's going to take us out, and that's everybody. If we all had a crystal ball for that, I think we'd all be quite well.
But long term, you're looking at favorable submarkets that are suburban. Griffin Towers, for our listeners' sake, is in Santa Ana core. I'll call it the South Coast Plaza metro market, correct?
It is.
It is. So that's a Class A. It's got an urban appeal in a suburban location on the map, as opposed to Mission Ridge being pure low-rise suburban. I can't speak to Fullerton and what's going on there, but this is very interesting because it's not CBD core kind of stuff, but it's still core product in Class A locations.
That's it. And, we're focused on buying previously institutionally owned assets where the seller did everything right except buy it at the right time. And that requires us to not have to put as much capital in for just back of house or repositioning. The money we're putting in goes straight to leasing, which is moving the needle on the valuation of the asset. And so, and we think there's a pretty big disconnect right now between, office investors. Like 18 months ago, guys they'd take my call as a friend, but like they didn't want to hear it, right? Office, like, Mark, call me in 6 months, we'll talk again. Everybody's trying to figure it out now. I mean, it's totally changed. You look at San Francisco, they're getting 30 bids on assets. I'm sure Trevor was able to attest to that. I mean, it's already bounced off of bottom. The pricing is already moving. It's very competitive. You got to find off market opportunities.
Interesting. So how'd you guys secure Mission Ridge? It was a broker deal, right?
It was. And unless I was getting the broker spiel there, it was quite competitive. And I actually believe that to be the case because I know some of the other groups that were after it and they were a little miffed they didn't get it. But there were 4 of us at the finish line. And we won it because of our ability to execute and our track record in Orange County of doing this post-COVID. We now have 1 million square feet in Orange County of this product.
So it's interesting. So did you have to use the old trick? You got to go hard day one. Give me a purchase contract and a phase one.
Lord knows they tried. Lord knows they tried. But
So you're saying other buyers tried that?
Other buyers did offer that, and we did actually. So to be clear, it was upon signing the purchase and sale agreement we were non-refundable with a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
Then right. We were allowed to have an access agreement and get in and do a decent amount of the legwork prior to that.
Right. So that's interesting. So being an observer, a remote observer, of Southern California office markets, and not being an office player myself, but being a voracious reader of information, I see Irvine Company unloading assets and just cutting out their losers. So it's kind of a Warren Buffett strategy. Cut your losses early, move on. Downtown San Diego, I know they've unloaded 2 large assets there. It may have been more. And moving away from that CBD office and doing what they're best at is suburban office in high job growth areas, particularly Silicon Valley and Orange County. So it sounds like that the market turned, Mark, where you see this Mission Ridge type investment scenario play out in other suburban markets now, where you're going to have multiple buyers across the board?
Yeah, every process we've been involved in for, I'd say, the last 9 months has been quite competitive. You need some angle, some edge. In our case, we were well capitalized, same partnership, JV docs on a shelf with a partner that we'd done 2 other recent acquisitions with to have credibility at the closing table.
Sure. And is the brokerage community representing their sellers? Are they asking to see the money when you get down to the final
They clearly want to understand it. Where is it coming from? And they're not looking for some daisy chain answer. Where is it? They need to be able to check that box. The last thing anybody wants to do in this market is waste 4 months with somebody that doesn't have the ability to close. And one thing I would say too, Stuart, is over the last 6 months, we've seen the competition increase. I will say over the last 2 months, I think investors are a little more timid with what's going on with the tariffs and the macro climate and not fully having clarity on where this is going. But before that, we were seeing a very clear, return to office from an investor perspective. Some of our buds that are on the institutional side One of them actually closed a deal. Landrock, who did the principals of that firm, were at WHI YREP when we did all of our stuff in Roseville together. They just bought a deal with Pendulum in Glendale at a beautiful deal that Goldman Sachs and Cruzon unloaded. So they're coming back.
So you have these markets. So you have suburban markets in LA, you have downtown LA, Orange County. You've been in Phoenix. This is not the dynamic that's currently going on in Phoenix, correct? Where you've got multiple buyers chasing office deals.
No, there are multiple buyers, especially if it's in Tempe or Scottsdale, Paradise Valley. Right. It's garnering a lot of attention, and there are some pretty high trades. You're still hearing about some pretty high basis trades that are a little surprising.
Okay, so Phoenix, secondary market for you guys. You talked about Roseville. Are you still active in Sacramento, searching in Sacramento?
We love the fundamentals in Sacramento, and when the opportunities present themselves to do what we did previously in Roseville for similar type assets, we'll be all over it again.
Talk about Roseville real quickly. 600,000 square feet?
Yeah. So when I was referencing what we liked about Mission Ridge, it's a smaller defined market. That's Roseville. You could really get your head around it. And this is a shout out to Chris Lemon and Zach Cawley, our buddies at Newmark, that helped us understand that market. And also Palmer Capital, who helped us make our investments up there. We could get our heads around that asset and drive that around that market and walk every building in a day to really get an understanding. And we made our first acquisition, Lava Ridge, and then we acquired Olympus off market from Ellis Partners and Baupost. And then the third acquisition was the only asset in between our first and our second acquisition. And it was on auction. And we bought it through L&R. We won it through an auction process. And we had your value option, and we had your best in class option. So we had like a menu for every tenant that came through. If you're cost conscious, go to Lava Ridge. If you want the best of the best, you're going to go to Douglas Corporate Center. And again, more granular tenancy, but the New York Lifes, the Morgan Stanleys, the Wells Fargos, the B of A's. It's that type of tenancy again. So you have that credit without the bullet.
And were you overweighted? In that area, did you guys control too much of the market?
I don't think so. No, and the beauty of buying these two is we bought it in 3 acquisitions and we exited in 5. So there is really the ability to buy the bottle and sell the shot in some of these circumstances. That's another thing that we really liked about Mission Ridge. It's 2 115,000 square foot buildings on separate parcels. So we don't underwrite.
Fungible.
Yeah, you have a lot of optionality. And when you look at those deal sizes, Stuart, if you peel off one of those buildings, 115,000 a foot, there is a lot of trade money out there still. There are a lot of folks. We just had a deal 2 blocks from Mission Ridge that traded a month before we closed at over $300 a foot. And we bought for 137, and we're exiting our model way, way, way below that. And so, with Roseville, it was the same kind of thing. And that's where we started, I think getting smart as we can be on Class A suburban office and what we like about it. Because, and I'll shut up in a second, but I think the the investor markets, I believe they're painting a broad stroke over all of office. But as you and I are talking right now, there's clearly such a huge difference between downtown LA, 1.4 million square foot bombers versus a 230,000 square foot 2 parcel low rise Class A office property in a small defined market. Like they're just, the risk profiles are so much different.
Well, agreed. So if you owned a portfolio of Class B suburban office in out of state markets, you might have a difficult time creating enough velocity and excitement there to get the kind of returns that you quoted earlier on Mission Ridge. So it's very interesting. You're right. It is a broad brush how others have talked about office, but breaking it down, as we did in our last podcast, we focused on San Francisco CBD. You have DTLA, which we can touch on very quickly. We know it's been a bloodbath in downtown LA. So it's very easy for me to understand how you can bifurcate your underwriting analysis on suburban versus CBD. So I get it. And Sacramento is, benefits from 8 years of Gavin Newsom. So a lot of fat and the government expansion of Sacramento, which has created this enormous job growth in Sacramento, access to affordable housing, quality of life. Sacramento has now arrived with that. So that's good to hear. So it's interesting. It's also a good transition for us to talk about the CBD markets because One Sansom has to be BPG's largest commercial asset, correct?
Yes.
So that was a JV. You must have. I think you guys have held that 10 years plus or minus now.
Yeah, a little over 10 years. Own that with PGIM, and they've been fabulous partners. But yeah, I don't want to go off on a tangent.
No. But my point is that you just did a significant lease there, and it was one of the larger leases, trailing last quarter performance statistics in the CBD. And you guys signed up a tech tenant. Can you talk about that real quick?
We signed an approximately 150,000 square foot lease with Databricks. I can say that because it's public knowledge.
Yeah.
I think the reason that we were able to do that is Prudential or PGIM had the foresight, along with Michael Barker and our team, to invest a significant amount of money into the ground floor to amenitize the asset. We spent approximately $25 million to greatly improve the area. We brought in Please Management, who's doing a fantastic job being almost a concierge to the tenancy and really changing the experience there. We've added a world-class gym. The conservatory does a great wedding venue business and other event venues. Mm-hmm. The NBA had an event there when they had the All-Star Week. And so it's, a new conference facility that's really cool. I'd love to take you through there, Stuart, when we're both in town at the same time. It's really cool what we've done, but that's what's required right now to differentiate. And these tenants, they really care about that stuff. It's not just noise that you read in articles where, you have to have the right amenities and then they'll come. Like we've done it and it's happened. And we know from the feedback that we've received from them and other tenants that have signed with us that these were the differentiating factors that led them to lease One Sansom as opposed to one of the competitors.
Well, we believe that. It's interesting because Ridge Capital talked about the same dynamic, that they had to offer that amenity package to keep traffic coming their way. And so now that's a market expectation for the tenants in the market. So and you guys led that because you guys did the $25 million just didn't happen yesterday. You guys did that a couple of years ago, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It was a process, and working with the city of San Francisco, where you have I won't go into too much detail because everyone is going to see this, but it was a challenge. Yeah. But we got it done, and I think everybody, including the city, is very pleased with what the resulting project looks like.
Okay, so that's great. That's very interesting. So comparing that to DTLA, you're in downtown LA today. The office market has just crumbled. We've seen some significant asset trades that we can touch on anecdotally, but does that market, if you did the same kind of amenity offering, is that dynamic occurring in downtown LA as well for office operators?
We're not seeing it yet.
Does it move the needle? Does it move the needle?
It will move the needle, but I think you have to be very careful to not overspend and over-improve. I think comparing downtown San Francisco to downtown LA is a little bit apples and oranges, and we're active in both markets. And, you have to remember, San Francisco view space is commanding triple-digit rental rates. Downtown LA is not. It is Class A trophy assets are doing deals. I'm going to try to make them. They do a lot of triple net in downtown LA, but just from a full service gross equivalent to full service gross equivalent, let's say you're doing $105 for view space in San Francisco, you're doing about $45 in LA.
Wow.
So the rents just aren't there to economically justify the same level of improvement unless you buy it really, really cheap and you believe that you can fill it up. And there are certain circumstances where we believe that to be the case. It's just a different beast in downtown LA.
Well, it is. And I follow it for obvious reasons. You and I both kind of grew up in downtown LA in separate portions of our real estate careers. So I have some emotional attachment to it. So basically the numbers that you just described just translates to a huge erosion of value for Class A office assets downtown. And I did see recently where either the city or county of LA made a major purchase. So I assume that's going to help stimulate that part of the area in downtown, at least somewhat. So I did touch on in downtown San Francisco. In our last podcast, we talked about a 3-year static office attendance rate generated by Castle Systems that was about 45%. Today, Castle says downtown LA is 49%. And I don't know, Mark, how long that's been at 49%. I assume it's trended upwards from some lower number to 49% today. Is that trend continuing upwards? Do you see it?
I think it's so. Castle is such a broad metric that isn't foolproof. It only tracks certain buildings, certain Class A buildings, certain markets. There's a wide spectrum of other assets that are not being tracked. So it's a little difficult to just look at those metrics and make a judgment overall. I mean, trust me, when the pandemic was happening, I'd check it every week, right? Hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? I think we've just read enough articles about it. No discredit to Castle, but you really have to focus on the big picture and what's happening holistically. We are seeing, take City National project in downtown LA. It's like 97% leased. It is bustling. And they just signed another lease that brought them to that 97. What we're finding in downtown LA is if you are a savvy, sophisticated owner that's well capitalized with the right product, you're going to lease. So like 2 Cal Plaza is 90. At CM's project, I think they're 97 or 98% leased. So we're seeing it for the well capitalized, savvy owners. Then you have everything else, and you have a lot of, Brookfield has had a number of assets down here that have been sitting in purgatory for quite some time that are starting to work through the capital markets, where you're starting to see some pretty major trades, i.e. 777 South Fig at 117 a foot. Its sister building, Ernst & Young building, is under contract right now. E still ran that process. We're hearing that's going to be about $130 a foot. The Aon building, just County Corner us in downtown, was about $135 a foot. So you're starting to see, you can easily triangulate value right now because there's just been enough trades. 801 South Fig traded as well. That was about $130 a foot as well.
So that's about $100 a foot lower than similar assets in CBD San Francisco. So interesting.
Well, and what I tell you, Stuart, is that was like CBD San Francisco a year ago. We're starting to hear about deals now. I mean, they're printing at over $300 a foot. And there's a deal on the market right now. In San Francisco.
Right.
In San Francisco. Right. So it's a huge discount to San Francisco, but you don't have the drivers that San Francisco has.
Right. And we don't know what that future driver is going to be in downtown LA. What is it going to be? Do you have any idea? I have no clue.
Honestly, we don't claim to be smarter than the next guy. You've known me well enough to know the case. But what I will tell you is that there are going to be the winners and the losers. And the winners are going to be what we just described. It's happening right now with the City Nationals, the 2 Cals. The losers are going to be those that are stuck in purgatory right now. And I think the future of those assets is really in question. I've heard data center conversion, resi conversion, everybody talks about it, but I think it's so difficult to pencil that, even if the city's trying to make it easy, which even the city of LA making it easy is still probably quite difficult. So I don't think that's as feasible. I just think you're going to have a number of assets that go by the wayside downtown, but there's still going to be a need. There's still a lot of leasing happening downtown. A lot of the people that left downtown are gone. There are a lot of tenants still right-sizing that signed 2, 3, 5-year leases at the inception of COVID, not knowing what their footprint was going to be at this point in time, and don't necessarily want to live through a TI. So you have a lot of musical chairs. And if you can buy right and capitalize your asset properly, we think that, we're seeing it, those landlords are able to capture a disproportionate amount of the velocity that is within the market. And I would also say, Stuart, we're finding different ways to play in the capital stack than previously. Just, as opposed to traditional acquisitions of an asset, we're finding lenders that are being creative in terms of recutting their loans into an A note, B note structure where you sock in the middle with new equity that gets a preferred return. So at a time of sale, the A note gets paid off, followed by your money plus a certain preferred return, followed then by a split between lender and new equity. And that's a way for equity to get comfortable with making these investments at this point in the cycle because it's pretty well insulated. And it's a way for lenders to not have to continually feed the beast of capital required to keep these office buildings relevant.
Well, that's interesting. Was there any one specific deal that you can speak to that you saw? Maybe you weren't a participant where they did the lender did split their exposure just as you described?
It's happening real time, and I won't say anything at this moment, but give it 6 months and you'll hear about it.
We saw a couple life company lenders but essentially, the old-fashioned way, purchase money mortgages on failed apartment assets in downtown Oakland. So, and there were two major life players that did this. So, very, very, very interesting. I mean, literally, the life companies carrying back as high leverage as 90% of the cost. Now, that purchase cost to the buyer is a fraction of what it costs to build it.
Right.
So, and I'm sure there's some kind of sustainable period, i.e., a guarantee of interest for a certain period. But those are tremendous financing vehicles and a real market turn in the market. So you've mentioned post-COVID several times. So just quickly, evolution of this asset acquisition strategy post-COVID. You guys were active in COVID. Post-COVID, you saw opportunities. Can you just give us that evolution description?
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I think it's just increased our conviction in going to the Class A suburban office markets. But what we're seeing more and more is John doesn't want to drive downtown. They want to but they also don't want to work from home. So they want to be in a nice, presentable office project that they can bring their investors in, they can bring their clients in, and still have a Class A product and a certain image. But they don't want to drive all the way downtown, and they want to be able to go to Timmy's baseball game. They want to be able to, take their clients out on the golf course. So the move to the suburban Class A office product is something that we've seen, and we don't see it changing anytime soon. So whereas before, I think we were a little more agnostic whether a deal makes sense. If a deal makes sense, we're going to go after it. I think our thesis is narrowing because of our experience firsthand with the lease up of those product types, the Class A suburban.
So, and what happened in the pandemic? Well, what were you doing personally with BPG? Were you working on an asset that you just closed and boom, the pandemic happened? Can you give us tell us a story here?
Yeah. We did close one right before the pandemic, and unfortunately, that one didn't go so well. It's selling as a short sale right now. Knock on wood, that's been our only deep wound, but I know we're not alone. We've spent a lot of time early on in the pandemic working with tenants to ensure that they remained current, and we were surprised at 99% collections at a time when it seemed like there was a fundamental shift. I mean, it was incredibly high. And this is across our portfolio. We also spent a considerable amount of time with our lenders, obviously. Loan maturities. We all know that it's not the right time to force anything in terms of forcing a sale now or forcing a refi now. All of our lenders, with the exception of one, have been great to work with. And we've looked at it as a partnership, and we've found solutions. So a lot of time was spent with the lenders, and our time now, I think is split between obviously asset managing what we already own, but being aggressive on the pursuit of new deals right now.
So you're a real testament to investing out of the area still. You've got a great front row seat and lens because you office right in downtown, as you have for years, downtown LA, as everyone knows on our listening community here, that LA is experiencing, Southern California, LA proper is experiencing tremendous strife between the Palisades fires, budgetary issues at the government level that haven't gone away, similar to San Francisco, massive homelessness downtown that no one seems to have a solution on. You've got some bright stars with the new owner of the newish owner of the LA Times, who's a genius and a billionaire at the same time. And that's sort of that private side market dynamic that's occurring in what I'll say blue run cities that I think will help continue the recovery of these areas. I don't know about downtown LA yet. So then you have the tariff strife on top of everything I just described, and then recent published stories about port traffic already slowing down in one of the largest ports in the world in Long Beach, Los Angeles, and how that affects downtown LA, because that's been shoulder to shoulder with the port's success in a lot of ways, obviously, and these other areas around it. The Arts District investment, I can't imagine the Arts District investment is going to continue to, it won't increase until downtown LA solves its problems, would be my guess, just because of the critical mass that you have downtown. So you guys are investing in suburbs right now. That's what you're looking at versus the messes that I just described. And we can talk about San Francisco, where you've got an AI revolution helping. Is Databricks associated with AI?
Yes, that's their primary business.
Right. So you've got an AI corridor, so more or less, with issues all around it. We've got the San Francisco shopping center that's got basically an 80% decrease in value, which is devastating to Lower Market Street and that supposed budding AI corridor. And you've got other office leases now occurring down there like Databricks, so it'll be interesting to see going forward. So that's my next question. The underwriting metrics going forward. We talked about in our last podcast cap rates for office approaching 7%. I've got a handle on cap rate histories here in multifamily in the Bay Area. Can you buy a deal for a 5? You probably can today, but cap rates and values are down, but rents are down, but cap rates maintained still at 4.5 to 5 across these various markets, even Phoenix, Orange County, San Diego for apartments. What about your target office deal? So Mission Ridge on a cap rate basis going in. I mean, anyone can say, here's my going in cap rate, depending on how you capitalize it. But generally, what would you say that is a market reflective cap rate at Mission Ridge?
Yeah, so that was an 8 cap at 52% occupancy.
Okay, so at 52%.
Yeah.
So you're underwriting that at what, a 38% vacancy then to get it to 90, calling 90 stabilized for
we never get that high. We get to about 85, low 80s in our occupancy. And we're building our we're really focused on return on cost. That's, because cap rates going in are very, that can mean so many. You could have an 8 and a huge tenant falls out next year that is coming. It's a known vacate, yes. And that drops to a 5. Or you could buy at a 5 and there's a tenant. I mean, it just, the cap rates are tricky. So we're really focused on stabilized return on cost. And at that, we're focused a lot on untrended return on cost. So no rent growth. In fact, in a lot of cases for us to successfully execute our business plans, we're dropping net effective rents about 20 to 25% compared to the competitive set. So, when you're buying one of the best assets in a submarket and you're able to drop the net effective rents to the tenant by 20, 25%, you're going to get a disproportionate velocity of the tenants coming in. And, so we've dropped the rents, and then we have static rent growth for a couple years, usually 3 years in our model. And if we're able to build to 12 to 14, that starts to feel pretty good. And so that's what we're most focused on. And I think the reason for that is there should be a lot of optionality at that point. There's always a certain element of our business that is a bet. And we're betting that the capital markets are going to improve, that people are going to continue coming back to the office, that office is going to be more of a accepted asset class in the investment community again. But when you're able to build to a 12 to 14, and assuming the debt markets come back, where historically you've been able to, get 9 debt yields, 8 debt yields, 10 debt yields on office debt. I'm not saying we're going to get back there, but if we get to a 14 or a 15, you might have the ability to refi a significant portion of your investment out of the deal if the capital markets aren't yet there to take you out.
And you've got patient capital on the GP side that you've aligned yourself with, backfilling with Michael's departure. And those folks are opportunists. I assume that bodes well for your future. Do they have a higher return expectation today?
No, and we're working through the final strokes of what that will look like. But they've already invested in Mission Ridge, for example, and very much see the world through the similar lens, which needn't say it, but that's critical in any partnership, that you guys have a similar belief system if you're going to go into something, because the last thing we want is to find a ton of opportunities that we can't capitalize on, literally and figuratively.
All right. Well, Mark, you wear all these different hats too. So you've been a multifamily guy as well. It's very interesting that Barker sees opportunities in multifamily. You've got this impressive track record in the Western states, particularly in California for office, now suburban office. But you guys recently did a deal in Austin for a value add apartment deal. Can you just touch on how did that happen? Were you guys looking at office down in Austin?
We always have our feelers out and have a wide network of, Stuart, brokers are your lifeblood. And we have a lot of really good broker relationships. And that deal, Chesapeake Apartments, fell on our desk. It was a syndicator on the sell side that, for a number of reasons, needed to unload the asset. We're seeing that theme and story time and time again right now, as I'm sure you are. And candidly, we were able to buy with pretty strong existing cash flow, knowing that we'd have to work through a rent roll, but able to still build a very strong return on costs on an untrended basis, albeit it's in Austin. And I'll be the first to tell you that that's been a challenge. We knew that it was going to be going in, and it has been. We've been working through the rent roll, but we're starting to see positive momentum now. And for the right deal, again, there's always going to be that bit of Michael Barker DNA in us where if we see a deal that makes sense, we're going to want to do it and find a way to get it done.
So will that happen for you in Southern California? I mean, I've spoke to a senior development executive for one of the largest multifamily developers in the country just last week about LA, and he quoted that there was only going to be one institutional quality multifamily start within LA County this year, which, and I know the market has been on its back multifamily wise, but I would see that as a potential opportunity, setting aside political things like taxation, transfer tax, all the obvious ones that we deal with in gateway markets like this right now, especially in California. That to me, I would think there might be a real opportunity to buy more existing.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there, Stuart. It is difficult to put the things that you mentioned aside. They're real. And I think that's one of the primary reasons that we've been a little more gun shy in our backyard. That said, we're looking at opportunities, and we find the right opportunity, we'll do it. We have deals come across our desk on a pretty consistent basis. So we think the time will be right here shortly.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting, because to be able to wear those two hats, especially with your background, I think gives you a real leg up in the market to identify those opportunities and capitalize on them as well. We've talked about where you guys have been. What are you doing personally now? You've got you started a family. You live in LA proper. Are you doing that crappy commute down I-10 to DTLA, or what's it like for you today?
Yeah, married. You've met my lovely wife Jackie. Daughter Chloe's just turned 6. We were out in the desert over the weekend to celebrate her birthday, and spent 3.5 hours on the 10 freeway coming back from Palm Springs, which was a blast. Dad's patience level was really tested. I do drive downtown every day from the west side, from Playa del Rey, where we live. Still staying active. Our shared passion of golf. I try to do as much of it as I can, which unfortunately is not too often these days. In the gym as much as I possibly can be, outside riding my bike, staying active. That's my therapy for all the crazy stress that our industry brings forth. But so far, so good.
That's great. And I wish you luck with that. It sounds like you look real happy, and you've got a tall order ahead of you, leading Barker Pacific Group through this market. And this volatile interest rate environment going forward and these opportunities that you've described. It will be very interesting to touch base with you a year from now or so and see where you guys have landed and see how these other investments are doing. But we greatly appreciate your time today. Mark Handin, Barker Pacific Group Managing Principal. Thanks.
Thanks so much for having me, Stuart. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Hard Corner Podcast. I'm your host, Stuart Grindle. Again, today's podcast is sponsored by Astro Sound Labs in Reno, Nevada, Bayrock Multifamily, and thanks again to him, my mom, and the internet as our music sponsor.